Thank you very much. We're going to do a tag team presentation today. I'm going to go over some of the data and some of the methods, and then Charlie's going to do a demonstration of this tool that we developed in conjunction with the Forest Service, with Hugh and Nicole, to provide a tool for land managers to assess the impact of wildfires on shrublands. So the main goals then of this study that we undertook, which was originally funded by the Forest Service, was to develop and quantify ecosystem services across the landscape, and to develop a method to understand the impacts of wildfire on those services. And of course, once we've had those data on those services developed, it allowed us to ask a lot of other questions. For example, how do shrublands recover post-fire? Looking at how to track carbon storage on public lands, and also how to inform restoration opportunities. And the other goal of the original study was to develop this online tool for resource managers to be able to access the data and query it for specific fires. So we developed data on a suite of different ecosystem services, 2 hydrological, sediment erosion, biomass and carbon, biodiversity and recreation. And so what I wanted to just highlight was how we integrated into that the impacts of wildfire. So it depended on the service we were looking at. So for the hydrological services like runoff and recharge, we integrated data on canopy cover loss. And this is from the ravage data, the rapid assessment of vegetation cover after fire, which is conducted on all fires over 1,000 acres on federal lands. And that was the same approach for sediment erosion. For carbon storage, we did a lot of work modelling biomass using Landsat data, so we can look at pre-fire and post-fire imagery for that. For recreation, we assumed that all recreation sites within their fire boundary would be closed. And for biodiversity, we didn't try to understand the impacts of wildfire. We just show it in pre-fire condition. So just a little bit more details on those, looking at impacts of fire on water and sediment erosion. Pre-fire, we report the water or sediment erosion data calculated across 12 years, which are a range of wetter and drier climate years. And then we, as I said, we reran the models using the ravage data. So here's an example of the copper fire, the ravage data. Areas in red had 75 to 100% change or canopy cover loss. And so we reran the basin characterization hydrological model using a reduced vegetation cover of 80%. For biomass, we worked hard to develop a random forest model to improve the biomass data for shrublands using a variety of input data, primarily FIA plots and also some landfire reference database plots, and looked at a variety of environmental covariates. But the key thing was this use of the NDVI and precipitation data, which allowed us to generate data from 2000 to 2013 for biomass, and something that can be updated in future years. So, for example, for the Zaka fire, we can look at the pre-fire data in the upper corner, and can look at how the biomass changes over time. Now, estimating fire impacts on other biomass pools, we also wanted to look at below ground, standing dead and litter. And in order to do this, we had to map the distribution, or attempt to map the distribution of these different types of shrub species, the obligate cedars, resprouters and faculty cedars that we've been hearing about this morning. And then once we had those distributions mapped, we could relate that to the above ground live biomass data and also data in the literature. Here's just a snapshot of some of the distributions of those key post-fire regeneration types for the area. And we estimated that the facultative cedars dominated the landscape in terms of their biomass at 71%. Obligate resprouters and obligate cedars and obligate resprouters were less at 5%. And then those distribution data fed into sort of a decision-making framework where they got integrated with the above-ground live biomass, and also the information for the literature. So we can see that in here we're looking at the below ground biomass. We can see that we're multiplying by different proportions for the obligate seeders versus the obligate resprouters to try to capture the different amounts of biomass in those different types of shrub species. Also, within the tool that we want to show, we also wanted to present not just the long-term loss, not just the short-term loss of biomass before and after the fire. We also wanted to look at the long-term loss because, as we know, that shrubland can regenerate. So to estimate the long-term loss of biomass, we wanted to identify pixels on the landscape based on their fire history that were unlikely to recover. And this was work that we undertook for a different project using fire history. And in those pixels, we reassigned the shrub value to a annual grassland value to account for the lower biomass. And then we calculated the difference in those two numbers. So an example from the Thomas fire, we can see that there's 500,000 odd metric tons of above ground live biomass that were lost over the short term, but about 54,000 metric tons were lost if you use this method to try to identify pixels that won't recover over the long term. So just before we go into the demonstration of the EcoServe tool, just to explain, it involves two steps. The firstly is sort of a desktop interface, and this is something that's getting managed every year to integrate new fire boundaries, click to the ecosystem services data, and then integrate the ravage data, and then upload it to the server. And that's for a select personnel who are involved with that. And then there's the public interface where people can query specific fires and download the data and the reports. So I'll hand over to Charlie now, just to let you know the study area boundary for which we've got data is this area outlined in black here that encompasses the 4 southern national forests.
Seatbelts on, tray tables up, we're going to do a live demo here.
Well, if we could get loaded.
Anything could happen, turbulence.
No? Ashley.
Help, Ashley! Thought we had it all.
I thought it was down.
Great, thanks Emma for that introduction. So one thing I'd like to mention too is that one of the genesis of this tool was the Forest Service's need for something that would characterize these fires for natural resource damage assessments. These are reports that the Forest Service is sometimes required to produce to support possible litigation effects of fires that are usually man-caused. So that's kind of like was the push behind developing this whole tool. And what I want to do now, if I dare, is just give you a little, before I go into the tool, is just go into how you would enter the tool itself. Hopefully this will work. You just type in SoCal. There's a number of different entry points for the tool. We have it linked on a couple of different Forest Service sites, but this is the landing page for the tool. And a couple things I want to point out is, or one thing I really want to point out is this methods document. And this is a great resource. We've worked pretty hard on keeping this up to date. And if you have any questions about when you're running the tool, this is a really good resource. It has kind of step-by-step things that I'm going to go through here really quickly, but also at the bottom too, there's some really references to some of the resources that we used to build the layers behind this tool, as well as some of the rationale behind some of the layers and the way we displayed them and processed them in the tool. So without further ado, let's have a look at the map. what I want to do here is, so when you open up the tool, you generally get an overview of the entire study area. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize too is that this is not all California. So what we focused on was this kind of super eco-region around the 4 forests in Southern California that we're all fairly familiar with. So we don't really deal with any fires at this time outside of this area. So when you open up the tool, you get a fairly standard web map interface that we're all familiar with. And so the tool itself, there's no requirement, there's no authentication that you have to do to access it. It's open to anybody, and obviously it's a web-based product, so there's no download or anything like that. Fairly standard options over here on this button on the left. You can pick a variety of different base maps and some ancillary data for reference watersheds and various boundaries. I'm going to go through this really fast because Nicole has just told me I have 5 minutes left. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at just the Thomas Fire and some of the services, probably just one of the services that can be accessed here. So right now, first thing you do is pick the year. Next, pick the fire. And so you see we have Thomas and Thomas US Forest Service only. Like I said, natural resource damage assessments often are required to just assess the impacts to Forest Service lands. And so we've created data sets for all of the fire, the entire fire perimeter, and just the area that's within the Forest Service. So in this case, the next step is to pick one of the services. We'll take a look at carbon storage. Says same selection, says okay. And on the left, you have the fire, a GIS display of the rasters, pre-fire and post-fire. And you can see definitely the impacts. The bins are displayed right here. So it's pretty obvious that there's been quite a fair amount of loss of biomass in all pools post-fire. Over on the right is sort of a tabular display of the data that you're seeing, the pixels within the fire boundary. And that data can also be displayed graphically. The data can also be downloaded if you want to play with it within your own geospatial system, or to create reports for damage assessments. And I want to point out too, I want to move on just to another one of the services while we have some time. Water runoff. Again, as Emma pointed out, this is based on the basin characterization model. That's post-fire, and that's pre-fire. And again, a breakdown of, in this case, the volumetric total of runoff for the fire. Quick look at sediment export, and this is based on the INVEST model and presented in tons per acre per year. One thing I want to point out too is that in most of these things, both the, as Emma pointed out, both the sediment export and basin characterization model products are based on burn severity from the ravaged product. And if you take a look at this area, you can see what stands out. Well, obviously a pretty high severity in most of the fire, but look at that chunk of green up there in the north. So, you know, sometimes fire perimeters are sort of administratively and politically drawn. So for some reason that area didn't burn very much in there, but it was included within the fire. And that's kind of reflected in this case, the post-fire data. You can see that area looks pretty similar to the pre-fire data. So before Greg comes up here and yanks us out of here, I think I'd like to encourage you folks, if you want to take a closer look at this tool, then please corner myself or Emma. I'll be glad to walk you through it, whether it's during this session or if you want to set up a webinar at some point in the future. And I'd also like to thank Nicole Molinari, had a lot of input and helped guide us in the development of this thing over the years, as did Hugh. So thanks very much.
Thank you.